Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our first panel discussion of the day presented by the College of Education. I would like to begin by introducing our three panelists and share a brief biography of each with you. Let's begin with Dr. Margarita Wulftange. Dr. Wulftange was a bilingual teacher for many years in California and Oregon. She taught students who spoke a multitude of languages other than English and Spanish how to speak these languages in dual immersion Spanish-English bilingual programs. After training colleagues and working with parents, she was inspired to become a teacher-educator. Helping K-12 students and their teachers with the teaching and learning process is a wonderful way to spend time. Dr. Wulftange came to Western New Mexico University in 2008 and enjoys working with students, teachers, and parents in the greater Western New Mexico region. Our second panelist, Ms. Fiona Bailey. Ms. Fiona Bailey decided when she was in kindergarten that she wanted to be a teacher. She wrote her first Why I Want to Be a Teacher essay in 3rd grade, and she studied the style and effectiveness of each teacher she had. After student teaching, she graduated in 1987 with a formal degree in elementary education from Sterling College, located in Kansas. She also received a master's in outdoor education in Illinois, where she then taught 4th grade in Wilmette. She moved to Silver City in 2006 and taught 5th grade for 1 year at Stout Elementary. She then moved to 1st grade, where she has proudly been ever since. Mr. Pete Rankin, our third panelist. While enrolled in law school at UNM as a pathway to create social change, Mr. Rankin began coaching high school soccer and realized that unlike lawyers, teachers have the power to create change much earlier on. So he changed careers and began teaching special education in Farmington High School in his hometown, Farmington, New Mexico. From 2002 till 2009, he taught special education classes while continuing as a head coach for the boys soccer program. From 2009 until 2011, he took a sabbatical from education to develop a business of natural building and property management. In 2011 and 2012, he returned to the classroom to teach in the middle school ED room in Deming, New Mexico. He is now currently teaching social studies and experiential education at Aldo Leopold, located in Silver City, New Mexico. Let's all give a round of applause for our panelists. The format for today's panel begins with me asking a topic question. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to respond to the prompt. After this, we would like to allow the audience to ask questions. Ms. Straubinger will assist with the microphone. Let's begin. Our topic for today: what are some of the ways that the education profession has changed during your tenure? Dr. Wulftange, would you like to start first?
Buenos días a todos, muchas gracias por haber venido y me alegro mucho verles a ustedes aquí en esta gran universidad. Muchas gracias. So good morning and thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure to see you all. One of the first things that I wanted to talk about when she mentioned the prompt about how education has changed since I've been a teacher was I was a bilingual teacher the whole time that I was a classroom teacher. And one of the reasons that I decided to go back to grad school was because I was noticing there was a lot of difficulties to be a bilingual teacher, to be a bilingual student in K-12 schools. And so part of my research and what I wanted to do was to help students and parents that were trying to navigate the educational system. So I was at the time in California, and there were laws being implemented in California that you could not have a bilingual education, that you could not, there were laws trying to be implemented that you could not speak Spanish at schools, and that if you had an undocumented status as a teacher, we were legally required to report any students that we knew who were undocumented. So this, as a teacher, as a bilingual teacher, this was a huge concern of mine. One is that it's not my duty or I did not see it as my duty to be a law enforcement agent to report students' immigration status. So that was something where I wanted to find out about what exactly was this law entailing, and I wanted to do some research on that. Also, for the bilingual, when the law in California was trying to be passed so that students could not use Spanish at all on campus, and that teachers could not use Spanish to teach them, I wanted to find out again what were the exact parameters. I wanted to push those as far as I could, like what exactly could I do so that I could speak as much Spanish as possible? When could I do that? What did the law say about when I was personally talking with parents, children, and when I was teaching? So that changed a lot. The first law about the teachers having to report, and it was only teachers, it was teachers, medical officials like nurses and doctors, let's see here, and it was firefighters as well. So, but that law, or it was passed in California, but then it was deemed unconstitutional. So that was a very positive thing. And so it's one thing, but people kept thinking that they had to report, even though it was deemed unconstitutional. So that was one thing, is making sure as teachers that we know what the laws are so that we don't do something we don't have to do, like report somebody's undocumented status. But also too, the part about Spanish, teaching in a bilingual program, one of the things was that you can use Spanish in schools, and that's different here in New Mexico. New Mexico, in the Constitution, it says that we are a bilingual state, so in Statute 12. So that was one of the things that we don't have in California. And so the law was passed, but parts of it were deemed unconstitutional. But I wanted to make sure that all my colleagues, all the parents, all the students, all the legislators, senators, everybody knew what teachers could do and what they couldn't do, and that to make sure that we as teachers were not limiting ourselves, because that's what I was finding. Well, I can't speak Spanish because there's this law. I'm like, well, actually it doesn't say that. So we need to make sure we know exactly what the law states as teachers so that we can push it as far as we can. And then, so that was a change for me. So I don't know how long. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Ms. Bailey?
Well, when the first thing that came to my mind was reading and how reading has changed. And like I said in my bio, I started studying the methodologies of all my teachers because that I knew. It's not like I kind of knew, I knew this is what I wanted to do. And, and I just grew up with this perception in the 70s of those who show that they want to learn, get to learn, and those who don't show that they want to learn are kind of left to the side, or, oh, Fiona, why don't you go help so-and-so learn? And and so I took that as a compliment, but, in hindsight, it's like, wow, where was the teacher for this child? Then when I went through my reading methodology classes, I just remember the last day, it felt like, oh, by the way, something's coming called whole language. Don't know a lot about it yet. And so, sure enough, my first year teaching kindergarten was strictly phonics, and very, anything you wanted to do to make it exciting came from you. It was a very phonics-based program. And the next year came whole language. And so that certainly made teaching reading much more engaging, and the kids felt much more a part of it. But it wasn't very directed, and so a lot of the direction you wanted to take with how to teach reading had to come from the individual teacher. And so that was one change. Now, and I would say my years teaching 4th grade even were more in the whole language realm of how to teach reading. Then the next change was what we call balanced literacy, or comprehensive literacy, which is, it was like, why didn't I create this? Because it fits me so well. I mean, it encompasses everything. And it has a strong phonics base, and it has all the different reading strategies incorporated into it. And so that's been kind of in the journey of my journey through reading. And I think we're really at a good part in reading. And then when the Common Core standards came along, at least for the primary grades, they just fit so well with the approach that we at Stout are using to teach reading, which is that balanced part of, a strong phonics base, a strong sight word base, a very strong read aloud portion and shared reading portion and a guided reading portion where each kid is being stretched the way Flora was describing with her read alouds and the kids gaining information from that. And then the guided reading groups where each kid's individual needs are being met. And I just hope that as we continue, that balance and that look at all the needs of kids without segregating like I felt we were in this when I was a kid, it took place. And so that you have that component that encompasses all children and stretches all children. Because you can have a little kid who may not be able to decode those words on the paper very well yet, but boy, they can think about that story and that literature. And so that merging of those different programs and different methodologies is kind of where I think we're feeling good right now in reading.
Great, thank you, Ms. Bailey. Mr. Rankin?
Good morning, everybody. Thinking about this question today, I thought of something that I often ask students to do, which building a little bit on the previous person. Each individual student, and going back to the root of the word education, the Latin root is educare, which is to draw out from within. So reach each student where they're at and what they're passionate about. And then there's another term that's closely related in Latin that I feel that we often, or that in education, there's a danger of falling into, and that's the Latin root of seduction, which is seducare. And that's leading people astray from where their hearts are, where their passions are. And so this is my 13th year working with the secondary level students. And I noticed a trend over that period of time at the collective level, at least from the state level, and how we subsidize education and how we train, or how we assess teachers, not train them. I feel like this program exemplifies quality training, and working with Tanner really drove that home this year. But how we assess teachers, and I remember my principal at the first high school I started at, which was a school of about 1,300 students, and midway through the year he pulled me aside and we worked together in the athletic realm as well, and he said, there's huge changes happening. It was right before the No Child Left Behind legislation hit the ground, and this new system of the three-tier licensure and teacher assessment. And he said, I'm about to retire. And I'm glad of that. And I remember thinking, geez, I'm having a hard time as it is my first year teaching. Why would he tell me this? But said, I've noticed a lot of pressure on teachers, on educators to teach to the test, to get away from reaching students where they're at. And it's, I think one of the inspiring changes in that broader framework is that teachers, we still do that. We still teach to where students are at. We still reach them where they're at and draw out from within where their passions are. And I think that's testimony to the strength of the educational family, which I've been blessed to be a part of at 3 different schools, and then now working a little bit with WNMU. So I feel that focus from an institutional bureaucratic standpoint upon seducare, leading students astray, the test, not the student, is not a positive trend or change in education. But at the same time, a counterbalance to that, individual teachers really in the classroom, day-to-day relationships with students, doing amazing things in spite of that. So those two balancing trends in education. I've seen a shift away from educare towards educare institutionally, but individually in the moment, I've seen a holding steady and a lot of growth, as Fiona just mentioned, in terms of meeting student needs by teachers. So,
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. We would now like to take questions from the audience. Ms. Straubinger will be walking around with a microphone. Does anybody have any questions? Yes? Dr. Hurt?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I served with Fiona Bailey on the Learning Center for Dyslexia Committee for a couple of years, and I want you practice teachers to be aware of professionalism. Fiona and I sat around a table of 10 people who were all retired. We were the only two that were working, and Fiona took on every extra job to see that the kids who really had trouble reading in this community were reached. And so I want you to use her as a role model, and I also want you to just give her a round of applause for all this extra effort she's done.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What are some of the best classroom management techniques you guys have found?
I'll go first if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
The biggest thing is you've got to be prepared, because if you're not keeping those students engaged that whole time, that's when you lose them. So if you're turned around looking for that paper or whatever, then you're going to lose them. Now, can you always have everything ready for the entire day? No. So you have to build in to your routine, what are you going to do in those moments you're looking for papers? You know, if you're okay with them sitting and talking, let them know. You may sit and talk right now. If you're like me and you're not going to be able to find it, if you're distracted by them talking, then you have a little question and answer thing that you're doing. You know, you have to have routine built in, and you have to be prepared. And there's more time you spend at the beginning of the year forming your family, training your troops, however you want to call it, into those routines, the better off you are. And even when you think they are brilliantly into the routine, keep reminding them. And if you're looking at me thinking, oh, well, she teaches first grade, of course that's what you need to do. If you're at the secondary level, try it there too, because the more you have set in routine, the less interruptions and distractions you're going to have in your day. So it's an excellent question, and one that is at the heart of being a good teacher. So.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Any other questions?
Oh.
Or Mr. Rankin? Yes, you may answer the
I
question.
would have to say, building a little bit on what Fiona said, let the content manage. So, if you have in your plans interesting, relevant stuff that
Exactly.
the student connect with the student's lives, then
Right.
you're going to be into it, and
Yeah.
you're going to have a lot of management problems with the class. So,
Right. Yeah, make sure that what you're doing, you're passionate about,
Exactly.
and they'll follow you.
Dr. Wulftange, would you like to respond?
They said what I would have said, so I'll leave it to the classroom teachers.
Any other questions from the audience?
How have your teaching strategies changed over the years and with the adoption of the Common Core curriculum?
You want to go first?
Sure. I would say that I use more stories and more projects than I used to. I think that in terms of reaching students where they're at and finding what they're passionate about, and then designing projects around that place. So more stories, fewer lectures, more projects.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think the Common Core kind of very much correlated with how I was already teaching, and so it's kind of brought it in more. The thing that I have started doing because of it more than I used to is really focusing on not just on the Common Core standard, but the individual objectives underneath each one of those, and really helping the students to be able to name that. Not just be able to explain, oh, I'm doing this activity, but to say, I'm doing this activity because it's helping me learn this objective. And so it really has helped me reach each and every student. And I mean, the first day the principal came in because we knew they were going to start quizzing them on do the kids know the objective kind of thing. And he goes right up to my little one who, you know, it's like, oh no, please, please, I can barely get him to talk. You know, and so he's doing something, he said, oh, what are you doing here? And he says, well, and he tells, you know, I'm taking red and yellow counters. And then he does it. And luckily the principal was able to say, okay, he has to do this before he can continue on. And then he was able to say, and now the part plus the part equals the whole. And I'm like, you know, and so it does work. I mean, they are able to really connect much more when we tell them, you know, this is what you're learning from this. And that doesn't mean I'm not letting them discover it as well, because that's a big part of how I teach, is a kind of discovery-based learning as well, and letting them explore and get to that answer, to that objective, but then naming it. And I think that's the biggest change I've made, is naming those objectives.
Very good. Dr. Wulftange?
So I'm not going to speak from my own personal experience, but from one of my students' experiences. But based upon what you're saying, like that idea of integrating the objectives, so they're used to hearing it across different content areas. And one of my students was saying that she wrote her lesson plans, and so there's no Common Core standards for the content she teaches, and so she used the state standards, and the principal said, no, you can't do that, you have to use the Common Core, but there's no Common Core standards for the content she teaches. So she was kind of taken aback that the principal was telling her to do something that would mean she had no standards. So she was realizing, one, that she had to integrate, so whenever she's teaching her content, she is teaching language arts and math, but also sharing with the principal that when I am teaching science, I can also be teaching language arts and math, but I do have to teach science sometimes, just science, and I do need to have those content standards and benchmarks. And so that was a little bit concerning to her, that idea that only language arts and math are the focus and not other content areas such as science in that case, or social studies. But so making sure that we are always letting the students learn everything, not just language arts and math. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Recognizing the shift in public education and the view of society on education, and it's typically shifted to the negative, and then recognizing the changes in families and family dynamics, do you have any input for our new teachers on how do you interact with these families and this negativity that sometimes gets into your classroom?
Dr. Wulftange, would you like to answer that first?
Well, my students can tell you that a lot of what I'm going to say, they could probably tell you what I'm going to say word for word. But one of the things I always say is that the parents, although we hear things about them, they are your greatest ally in the classroom. They will help you at all times, and they can help you. One of the things too is the negativity. Sometimes we hear that parents aren't involved, or they don't care. One of the things is making sure that we provide opportunities as teachers that make sense to them and work with their schedules. So sending things home. If they can't come to the classroom to help, I used to send backpacks home with all the things that they needed to help me prepare my materials. Of course, that made me have to be really prepared, because I needed to give them things like 2 or 3 weeks in advance. So this was really great, but then they were a part of the classroom. But always talking with them. If they don't speak one of the languages that I do, making sure then that I have somebody to help me with that. But always thinking that they are an asset And if I have that mindset, then it changes it and they know that they're welcome in the classroom and at the school.
I let parents know immediately that I love their kids, and I let them know that I am there to do everything possible for their kids. And there are some tough issues that I evaluate, I guess, is this an issue that I can solve here if it's a behavior problem or something like that, or do I need to involve the parents? And if I do involve the parents, what's the best way to go about involving the parent in that and keeping us all on a positive note? And usually, I do, if a note's going to take care of it, I do a note. Because as soon as you make that phone call about something that is hard for a parent to hear, they're like, oh no, am I going to keep getting these phone calls? So if I haven't made a positive phone call yet, I kind of hold off on that troublesome thing that I need to talk to them about. Make sure that rapport is established before anything else. And like, it just came up the other day about retention and special ed testing, and how do you decide, and how do you have the conversation with parents, and how do you keep them from breaking down into tears. And as a first grade teacher, it's a conversation you have a lot. I mean, first grade tends to be a big year for needing to decide what direction are we going. I have that conversation right away in September. And I know a lot of why I can do that comes from my experience. But another big part of why I can do that, because I have colleagues who feel like they fail every time they try to have the conversation, and they have as much experience as I do. But I never say it as if it's a bad thing. I never say it as if your child's failing. Yeah, and it's always a positive. It's always, here's where your child's at. Here's what I'm going to provide for your child. Here's what I'm going to do for your child. And just as important as it is to let that parent know that you're a team, is letting that parent know that you love their child beyond everything else. And that's kept my classroom positive through 20 plus years, so.
Well, there's just one thing that I would add, and that's just the active listening. I would say listening to, and sometimes that's the hardest part, especially when the patterns are very, they seem to be entrenched, and you seem to see the same stuff happening over and over, and you see that it's connected to needs that are not being met at home, and but still being willing to listen to the issue and validate that. And I find that, at least from social studies, it represents an opportunity to connect it to bigger patterns in society. And if they can see themselves as part of that bigger picture, then that opens up other avenues of exploration.
Yeah. And I think if the parent understands that you understand their home life without needing to know all the details, but you understand that things at home might be harder than we want it to be, but that they know that you're not treating their child any differently because of that difficult home life, I think that really helps as well.
Thank you all for your responses. This actually brings a close to our first panel. On behalf of me and the rest of my classmates, we would like to thank you guys for your input, your experiences. It's going to mean a lot to us as we venture out into our futures. So thank you. Let's give a round of applause.